Um, well, good afternoon and welcome. I'm very pleased to see so many people here. As Corey said, this was put together kind of quickly, and in fact the temporality of this whole phenomenon is something I'm going to talk about. So, but I'm very happy that you're all here, and I want to thank Corey for introducing us and to the center for having us, allowing us to put this together. And I'd like to thank Leslie for inviting me to do this in the first place, for floating that idea and for joining me in facilitating this discussion. And even though I'm going to be talking for maybe 15, 20 minutes here about not just the Kony 2012 phenomenon, but the kind of range of responses to it, and through the course of that I hope to raise some questions, I want you to think of this as a discussion. I would very much like to know what your responses are. It's not just, of course, about our responses, but what are your responses? What are your thoughts? And for any of you who have experience if anybody has had experience in Northern Uganda or a special kind of interest in the region, I hope you'll share your thoughts and comments as well. So I'm just going to share a few thoughts on the phenomenon in Northern Uganda, and then the video. And then Leslie will share a few thoughts afterwards, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So I've struggled a little bit knowing how to structure what to talk about here. There are so many issues raised by the Kony 2012 campaign, and such a variety of interesting and important responses to it. But I'm going to first talk a little bit about about the video itself, just to kind of give a recap in case anyone hasn't seen it. And talk about my own interest in the Northern Uganda and how kind of my interest in the region and this phenomenon has developed. And then there are three key issues raised by these different responses to Kony 2012 that I think are important or worth talking about, having to do, first of all, with history and the necessity of historical context and having a historical view of the conflict in Northern Uganda, the problem of militarization, and then the problem of what some have dubbed the white savior complex. So first of all, by show of hands, how many of you have actually seen the video? Good, so most of you, all right? How many of you have heard of the video? Is that everybody? Okay. Yeah, I assume everybody has. If you're on Facebook, you've probably heard about it. That's where I first heard about it. So I'll just recap it really quickly and what's going on. So the viral video was produced by a US-based aid organization called Invisible Children. And they've been involved in programs in Northern Uganda, specifically in response to the conflict, in supporting school programs, helping former child soldiers get education. But they've also kind of more famously produced a series of films, short films, about the conflict. And their objective primarily is, as they claim, is to promote awareness of the 30-year-old conflict in the region, which has been between the militant group known as the Lord's Resistance Army, who have been fighting citizens, the Ugandan people in the northern region, and primarily targeting the Ugandan government. Their stated objective, and there are disputes whether there's actually any ideology driving the LRA anymore, but their stated objective is to overthrow the government and instate a theocracy based on the Ten Commandments. But despite what Rush Limbaugh claimed, it's not really a Christian army. So, Invisible Children, they've produced several videos detailing the evils of LRA's leader, Joseph Kony, and the suffering of the many children that he has abducted and forced into the army. And the most recent video that has gone so viral is a call to action, claiming that if enough people are aware of Kony and his crimes, then we'll be able to bring his reign of terror to an end. One of the most interesting and, I think, balanced and informative responses to the video has come from Sarah Weschler, who works for an NGO in Northern Uganda, has lived there since 2005, and a few days after the video came out, sent out this email, or posted this article. And in this she writes, "The overarching claim of the movie is that there is an evil man somewhere out there in Central Africa. He has spent more than 25 years waging a brutal war for absolutely no reason. His army consists of 30,000 abducted children, and he cynically uses any attempts at peace talks or negotiation as an opportunity to rearm his troops and strengthen his power. The biggest problem is that no one knows about him. But if we spread the word and pressure the US government to maintain military assistance to the Ugandan army, then by the end of this year, we can capture Kony and end this horror." And if the summary seems a little oversimplified and even a little sarcastic. It actually kind of captures, I think, the real oversimplifications that the video is guilty of. But I do want to point out, though, I mean, I think many of the critiques are legitimate, and I'm kind of interested more in what the responses to the video have indicated and what responses to the video have done than problems with the video itself. The problems have been pointed out a great deal, but there are also, I think, positive things in some ways. So, as I said, the video and this campaign are marked by this weird temporality. As many critics have pointed out, it's kind of belated. And in fact, my first response in seeing the video, after kind of feeling that emotionally charged, yes, we've got to do something, was, wait a second, now? Why, this would have been fantastic 10 years ago. Kony's not even in Uganda anymore. Peace talks in 2006 met some moderate success. The LRA moved out of Uganda, and they've caused problems in neighboring countries, in Sudan, Central African Republic, and the DR Congo. But this video is very much focused on Uganda. If you don't know where Uganda is, yeah, it's over on the map here. So, just right, anyway. Just below the horn and to the left a little. So temporally, it feels a bit belated. And also the video, of course, spread with astonishing rapidity. A huge flash in the pan, but now the passion seems to have died out a little bit. Well, a lot, in fact. And I think perhaps because of the massive responses pointing out problems with this, the unfortunate behavior of Invisible Children's founder, Jason Russell, in San Diego, which you may have heard about, but also perhaps because of the nature of the campaign, viral phenomena are by definition temporary in contemporary media. And so it's the day's big fad, but just as quickly they fade away. And a few days after the Kony campaign, there's this video of this little 2-year-old singing a song by Adele that seemed to be getting more attention than, it was really cute, but more attention than the Kony video. Did anybody see that one? No? Look it up, it's good. So although there continue to be very important discussions of the video and the situation in Uganda, like that we're trying to initiate here, the campaign seems to have lost steam, and some even claim that it has collapsed as quickly and ferociously as it rose. So I think now is actually a good time to be talking about it. Now that we've had a little bit of time to reflect on the phenomenon, reflect on it, we can ask, what just happened? What was this? Why was the video such a phenomenon? Will this attention to Kony prove to be a fad, just something temporary, or will it lead to significant changes? And what do the responses to it, both positive and negative, say about Western perceptions of Africa and the kind of limitations and possibilities of involvement in helping with situations like this? And these are a few of the questions that I hope we'll be able to discuss and collectively address. So a little bit about my interest. I first learned about Joseph Kony and the Lord's Resistance Army in 1997. I was called to serve in the Kenya Nairobi mission. At the time, most of the missionaries were being sent to Uganda, and I spent 15 months of my mission there, separated by a 9-month stint in Ethiopia. All of the missionaries there served in southern areas. Because of the conflict in the north, primarily the church was being built up in Kampala and Jinja and Entebbe. But the name Kony was in the air. I remember I hadn't been there very long when I overheard an Elder Nero, I remember saying something kind of offhandedly or obliquely about Kony. Somebody may have told him he looked like Kony, and I was like, oh, who's Joseph Kony? Everybody's talking about him. And he said, he's a rebel. He's the rebel in the north fighting the government. And so Kony's name was on everybody's lips. And over time, we started hearing about attacks and about the child abductions. There were reports in the newspaper. Some missionaries saw some of the victims. The LRA is notorious for mutilating its victims, for cutting off people's noses and ears and mouths and other things, and hands. And there were some missionaries who had seen some of these people who had managed to get away from the north, but who were suffering from these attacks. There was one of our elders, Elder Oda Konyero, in fact, had been abducted as a child from his school with a group of children, and as they were marching one night through the jungle, somehow a grenade went off and he managed to escape, but he had shrapnel in his leg from the experience. And there were many members of the church who were Acholi, Acholi being the main primary ethnic group in the northern area. But they lived in Kampala and the surrounding areas, and they often talked about the sad events that were going on in their homeland, and we had conversations with them about it. But it was interesting that while, of course, people recognized the horrors that the Lord's Resistance Army was committing, There were also criticisms of Uganda's president and the National Army. Yoweri Museveni was Uganda's president at the time, and he still has been in power for 26 years. He's won several elections, as these things go. But they claimed that the Ugandan People's Defense Forces, or UPDF, were just as guilty of human rights abuses as the LRA. And this, again, has been one of the things that has come to light in recent discussion. Long story short, I ended up going to graduate school and studying English, but I focused on African literature and ended up concentrating on East African literature. I'm teaching African Lit class next year if anybody's interested. And one of the authors we'll be reading is a Ugandan poet named Okat Batek, who is a Choli, and he's one of the authors that I researched a great deal and specialized in. And I looked at his work in relationship to the different conflicts in northern Uganda, and have had the opportunity in particular to examine the traditional legal system of the Acholi, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But it's had an important role in the peace building and conflict resolution process. So that's kind of where I'm coming from and where my interest came from. So that said, I was surprised, I was very interested, pleased for a little bit, and then kind of dismayed by the response, by the sudden attention that the Kony 2012 campaign initiated. Not dismayed that people were aware of it, but dismayed about the way it was being discussed and the perspective that it was sort of promoting. So the conflict was something I'd known about and followed for some time, so at first I thought it was great, fantastic, and I still think it's great that so many people are talking about what's going on in northern Uganda and are learning about the circumstances there. But given the film's well-documented oversimplifications and misrepresentations, the kind of narcissistic focus on the filmmaker himself, and the dubious calls to certain kinds of action, I was a little unsure about what the film really meant, what it was trying to do, and whether or not it would have positive outcomes. There have been many who claim that this kind of aid, and that aid deployed in certain ways from the West, can actually have much more negative impact, can do more harm than good. And this has been one of the criticisms of the film, that the type of aid that it's, and assistance that it's trying to promote can do more harm than good. And I tend to lean toward the critical side of things in some ways, but like Weschler, I think there is at least one positive outcome. She claims that despite the negative aspects of the campaign, she's hopeful about the discussions that have come after it. There's a professor at Yale, Christopher Blattman, who said the big story has shifted from viral video to the oversimplification of complicated issues, the accuracy of advocacy, and the white savior complex in aid. Really, newspapers are taking a nuanced view of aid and advocacy. This is big. And Weschler comments, I think he's onto something here. While thousands initially rushed to offer Stop Kony or the Kony 2012 campaign, they're gushing and unquestioning support. Many are now taking a step back and trying to grasp the complexities of the situation. People who have never before looked into the history of northern Uganda or the LRA conflict are suddenly doing research. And I was very pleased in a couple of my classes, we talked about this after the video first came out, and asked what my students' responses were, and several of them said, well, I got really excited about it. I wanted to order the action kit, but then I stopped and said, wait a second, something's funny here. And so they started doing research. And because there have been so many responses, they were able to kind of learn the truth and learn the real facts. And I thought that initiative was fantastic, and that's something that's happening and going on. And Weschler claims if attention can be maintained, it's possible that the international community may yet involve itself in constructive ways. And I should say at the outset, or say at this point, and I should have said before, I think Kony should absolutely be stopped, right? The things they've done are just horrific and heartbreaking, and Kony and the LRA have been out there for too long, and they should have been stopped a long time ago. But they're part of a larger problem, which I'll talk about in a second. So it's kind of hard to say, well, we just need to go in there and take him out, right? That hasn't worked, and there are reasons for that. But I think he should be stopped. So I would agree with this assessment then that the campaign has kind of inadvertently had, sort of in spite of itself, some generated real awareness. And many academics and experts, many of whom are Ugandans, have provided a remarkably rich set of perspectives on the nature of the conflict and what constitutes an appropriate response or level of involvement. And again, as I said before, it was kind of difficult to know what to emphasize here, but there are those three main points that I'm going to talk about, three responses, the first having to do with the question of history. At the end of the video, Jason Russell, the co-founder I mentioned of Invisible Children, who narrates and more or less stars in the video, and I know that sounds cynical, but it's kind of true. It's supposed to be about Kony, but he has a lot of screen time. He states, "We are not just studying human history, we are shaping it." And it's this very sort of moving, emotional moment. We are not just studying human history, we are shaping it. And this claim serves the larger emotionally charged objective of the video, trying to create a sense that supporting the campaign will change the course of human history. This is monumental. This is an event. But the statement also inadvertently points to one of the problems. He says, because they're not really studying history. They're taking Kony out of historical context. They single Kony out as this ultimate bad guy, and of course he is, right? But the hyper-focus on Kony obscures the fact that there is a history to the conflict and a larger regional context for what's going on. And if a real solution is to be found, that history and the broader context need to be taken into account. And in response to the criticism that they oversimplify just by focusing on Kony, they say, well, in 30 minutes we can only do so much, right? You can't convey a complex problem. But there are other videos. I watched one that was put together several years ago by a Ugandan journalist that does capture the complexity much more. And the video is extremely effective, if you've seen it, in kind of producing this emotional response. But you're responding to a misrepresented situation. And so whatever solutions we pursue then aren't going to quite align with the actual facts. And so according to Weschler and others have made this observation, any genuine understanding of the LRA conflict requires an analysis of Acholi marginalization throughout Ugandan history. And unfortunately and necessarily, I'm going to have to sort of simplify that history. I can't convey that complexity here, which I hope that's not too, well, I mean, it's kind of a paradox, but we do what we can. So, but if you're interested in this, you can look up Weschler's article, and there are other sources out there to kind of give you this sense of complexity. But she demonstrates how the ethnic and linguistic differences, kind of dividing north and south, and the geographic divide between the northern and southern regions of Uganda have led to a great deal of tension between the southern ethnic groups and the northern ethnic groups. And the British colonial government in the late 1800s and through the first half of the 20th century favored the southern Bantu ethnic groups. The Buganda had a centralized monarchy, and it was sort of easier for them to move into, or to sort of help them move into government positions, serving as clerks and sort of lower level bureaucratic positions. And the northerners were sort of marginalized, and this contributed to years of tension. Uganda's current president, as I said, Yoweri Museveni actually came to power after leading a rebel group himself in 1981. There had been several regime changes from 1963 when Uganda gained its independence up to this point. But the previous president was a Northern Ugandan, and because of the economic problems in the northern regions, many Acholi served in the military. They didn't have a strong agricultural economy like they did in the South, and so a lot of them were recruited into military positions. And so the National Army wasn't entirely, but largely composed of Northerners. So when Museveni's government overthrew the Northern Ugandan president, many of them fled. The army fled, they went north, and Museveni had his new group, the National Resistance Army. And as the former army and Northerners fled north, he sent his army after them. And it's whether he was trying to punish them or pursue them for crimes, it's kind of debated. But one critic has said, once in the north, the National Resistance Army came down on the civilian populations with astonishing force, in many cases committing indiscriminate acts of torture, rape, and even murder. Terrorized by these developments, many Acholis began to actively turn against the new government. As the esteemed LRA scholar Adam Branch once put it, it was Museveni's counterinsurgency that gave rise to a real insurgency in Acholi land. So it's not like Kony just came out of nowhere. There's a context, there's a history that needs to be taken into account. In the wake of this violence of Museveni's government against the north, there were several rebel groups that emerged that were fighting. Museveni managed to put most of them down, but the LRA remained resilient. And there's a particular history to the LRA. There was a group called the Holy Spirit movement led by this woman, Alice Lakwena, that she believed the Holy Spirit was speaking to her, telling them to fight, and it was kind of this mixture of Christian militarism with mysticism, African mysticism, and her army was defeated, and Kony sort of stepped in and filled the vacuum and formed the LRA. And early on, they had popular support, and this was known in Uganda when I was there, but they started using these harsh tactics as time went on. One of the things they did was attack the local villages in the Acholi land to show how Museveni can't protect you, right? Which seems kind of like a bad idea, and of course it was, because then they lost popular support. And as they lost popular support, they needed more soldiers, and so they started abducting children, and that's kind of how that started. And the estimates of the number of children abducted have kind of ranged pretty widely, but over the 30-year or so period, it's been anywhere from 30,000 to, it's between 30 and 60,000 children were abducted and forced into the army over that time. And many of them have escaped and weren't there for long, but the numbers are in that range. So recognizing this history, though, of where the LRA came from and this kind of broad context doesn't excuse their actions, but I think we need to understand that history to find real solutions. And there are more arguments along these lines, some demonstrating, for example, that the LRA is more a symptom of kind of broad-scale militarization in the region rather than a problem in itself. And so if you take out the LRA, if you take out Kony, you're treating the symptom and not the problem. And if you're interested in learning more about that, I can recommend some sources. Foreign Policy, or Current Affairs? Foreign Policy. One of those magazines has had some great articles on that have addressed that topic. So this does lead us to the second point, however, having to do with militarization in the region. And the Kony 2012 video calls for increased U.S. military intervention. And in fact, in the video, they talk about how their 8 years of campaigning led President Obama to commit 100 U.S. soldiers to go into Uganda to advise the Ugandan military, just in an advisory capacity and not fighting. And in fact, a few days ago, I don't know if you saw this, the African Union announced, I think it was on Friday or Saturday, that they're forming a new group of 5,000 soldiers, combining soldiers primarily from the UPDF, but also from Sudan, from Congo, and from the Central African Republic, a unit whose sole objective is to hunt Kony down for good. And they're going to continue operating in that region until they hunt Kony down. I hope they catch him, but more military, more fighting that's the problem, and so is that really going to lead to a solution? I hope my foot will be stuck in my mouth and they'll fight him and they'll catch him and everybody will stop fighting, but that's not really how it's happened in the past. So there are a couple of points on this question of militarization that I want to draw attention to. The first, as I mentioned, the UPDF has been guilty of human rights abuses. They have had a poor track record of protecting the civilians. They've had several operations. There was Operation Iron Fist, Operation Lightning Thunder, and these operations have failed and have resulted in many civilian deaths. And according to Mahmoud Mamdani, who's a wonderful political scientist from Uganda, and I was pleased to see that he had weighed in on this. I was interested to see if he would. He wrote, the reason why the LRA continues is that its victims, the civilian population of the area, trust neither the LRA nor the government forces. Sandwiched between the two, civilians need to be rescued from an ongoing military mobilization and offered the hope of a political process. In Invisible Children's defense is that, well, the Ugandan military is the best equipped, but if they're committing the atrocities, if they're guilty of these war crimes as much as anybody, you need to rethink the call to give them more support, more funding, more resources. So a second point, and more importantly, I think, is the issue of whether or not a military solution is even the best option. As I said, Obama sent troops there. AFRICOM, the African Command, U.S.-led initiative, has been involved there in recent years. Many of these, the Operation Lightning Thunder was supported by the U.S., and then the African Union announced this new force that was being put together. And in that report, it's interesting about the African Union, they suggest that the recent attention to Kony has been part of the reason why they decided to form this. And so in a way, the Invisible Children is getting what they asked for. But the many responses point out again that this militarization in the region is precisely the problem. And according to Foreign Affairs magazine, beyond the ins and outs of dealing with Kony, The political challenges in the region are simply too massive for Obama's new operation to yield much fruit. They published this last year after Obama had announced this, but I think they would make the same argument about this new African Union force. The violence in Uganda, Congo, and South Sudan has been the most devastating anywhere in the world since the mid-1990s. Even conservative estimates place the death toll in the millions. There's been a war in the Congo that literally, I mean, the death toll has been in the millions that hasn't received much media attention. And they argue the LRA is in fact a relatively small player in all of this, as much a symptom as a cause of the endemic violence. If Kony is removed, LRA fighters will join other groups or act independently. Civilians will remain exposed to atrocities committed by other armed groups, including their own armies. And one of the problems with these operations in the past, with Operation Lightning Thunder, is that when they fail to get Kony, they just make him really, really mad, and they retaliate and end up attacking the civilian population. I was interested to see Mamdani, in his response, argue that the 70 million plus who have watched the Invisible Children video need to realize that the LRA, both the leaders and the children pressed into their service, are not an alien force, but sons and daughters of the soil. The solution is not to eliminate them physically, but to find ways of integrating them into Ugandan society. Now, my own research has examined this phenomenon. I mentioned it, and I think it can be kind of difficult to imagine how could you reintegrate these people into society? How could you extend forgiveness? How can you reconcile when they've committed these kinds of atrocities? But it's interesting that traditional Acholi modes of justice, which focus more on restoration, on restoring unity when unity's been disrupted. They've been somewhat successful in helping child soldiers become reintegrated into society, because those child soldiers are both victims and perpetrators of the crimes. They're in a very complex situation, and these Acholi modes of justice and of kind of extending forgiveness have been effective in helping them become reintegrated. And I mean, it's not a cure-all, but it's been effective to some degree, and Acholi leaders have repeatedly said, let us handle this by our own means. Let us deal with this. We have techniques, mechanisms for handling things like this, and let us do it. And they've resisted the International Criminal Court. They've resisted external offers for help, and they maintain that right to use their own means. So a third and final point, and I'll just mention this briefly and kind of pose this as a question, because it brings us to the issue of what constitutes an appropriate response to all of this. Some critics have claimed that the video is evidence of the white savior complex, or the belief that Africa is defenseless and helpless and therefore needs white Americans to come and save it. They can't do it on their own. We need to save them. So this view has been offered by some in kind of cynical and angry tones, and others in more balanced tones. There's a fantastic response put together by the Ugandan journalist Rosebel Kagumire that explains this in some ways, but it's been repeated numerous times to kind of different degrees. And it's difficult to hear for those of us in the West who do want to help, who feel like I should do something. But it's important to keep in mind it is possible and necessary for us to help, but our motivations for helping, the way we help, and the way we talk about helping are absolutely important. Are we cooperating, recognizing, and supporting the very real abilities of the Ugandan people to address these problems, even if they're trying to address them in ways that we wouldn't be our first kind of impulse to address them? Or are we infantilizing them, assuming that because we are Americans or because we come from a wealthy nation, we know better than they do what they need? Of course, not all efforts to provide assistance in Africa do this. There are many wonderful organizations that have been wonderfully effective and do great work. But many responses to Invisible Children's campaign with trying to get Kony suggest that they suffer from this kind of savior complex, and in many of the responses kind of jumping on board with it and saying, yeah, absolutely, let's do exactly what you're saying here, are in danger of sort of falling along those lines, even if the intentions are basically good. So I'll be interested to hear what you have to say about that, what you think about that critique. But I want to conclude with a quotation from Dina Mengistu, who's an Ethiopian novelist and journalist who wrote a response. He writes, "The doctrine of simplicity is always at war with reality. Our best, most human instincts of compassion and generosity, if they are to be meaningful, can't come from a marketing campaign as simple, as base as an advertisement for a soft drink that promises you the world for a single sip. If we care, then we should care enough to say that we need to know more, that we don't have an easy answer, but that we are going to stay and work until we find one. You can't put that on a t-shirt or a poster. You can't tweet that, but you can live by it. Thank you.
Before I try and see if I can make this other microphone work, I wanted to make a couple of comments. I think Peter gave us a great history and analysis of the responses, and I don't really have much to add to that. I really appreciate that. I wanted to draw your attention to the handout that I think many of you have. Are there those who came in do not have it? Okay, I'm going to hand this out here. There's actually only, I think, about 9 of the extra ones that I had. But this handout gives you a sense of what some African or Africanists, scholars in the nation are doing, put together. And I'm actually part of this organization called the Association of Concerned Africa Scholars that you can see the website there. And the first link, I think, that's listed there that says it's not ready yet. And it's still not quite ready. They're still working on it. We didn't get, hopefully by the end of today, they will have more things posted on this site. But some more information and resources for you to look at. And because a lot of us, we see something and we want to do something. And especially this video, it really calls for action. So a couple of things that I want to point out that this Association of Concerned Africa Scholars say is that they actually put out a statement and a press release to say that the United States government should, and they've bolted them there, one, cooperate closely with the African Union, which Peter talked about. 2, also to acknowledge and push for negotiations, and acknowledging that that is the best way of going about this, to create the environment to bring these negotiations about and reintegrate these members of these groups into society. And part of that has to do with the 2 other points that they make, and that is to fully comply with the U.S. Child Soldier Prevention Act of 2009, meaning that you do not give assistance, military assistance, to countries that still have child soldiers that are allowing this sort of thing to happen, and to stick to that, as well as this other arms trade treaty, or to seek an effective arms trade treaty to cut off these arms trade that's going on. And I hope all of you should ask yourselves when you hear about these conflicts, where are the guns coming from? When you see these youth pictured in these articles with machine guns and they have these big strips of bullets, where are they getting them from? You should ask yourselves that. There's a long history of how these things are coming about and how the end of the Cold War affected what happened in a lot of these countries, and where are these guns coming from? And so think about that too as well. There are 2 places that if you would like to donate money or other forms of support, you can go to the UN High Commission for Refugees and the UN Children's Fund. And they're still working on meeting the needs of former child soldiers, so people who are being recruited and other victims of these conflicts. But I also want to reiterate this call that we need to, I think it's encouraging that people are interested in gaining more information about it, and that we need to inform ourselves about this. And also, I think it's very encouraging that Ugandan voices have been brought into the dialogue. I was particularly happy that this Ugandan journalist, her voice came on NPR soon after this video came out. I thought that was very encouraging, because it is important that we listen to people who are on the ground and listen to their responses and their solutions as well. So I also encourage you to do that. So now, in the rest of the time, we do want to have a discussion. We want to hear from you, and we will also chime in. So I have this microphone here, and we can move it around, and we'll just see how it goes. So I will, we'll open it up for questions and go from there. Okay.
All right, so I had a question as to how we can integrate, you had mentioned integrating the LRA into, society again, and I think that's great because, they're still children of God, they're still people, and they still have that capacity to, I think, function in society. But how do you incorporate the leaders of those people, like Joseph Kony, back into society? Like, you can't, in my mind, I've seen several moments in history where the U.S. has worked with pretty bad leaders, and they still stay bad, and it just is still this bad, mess going on. So how do we effectively shut him down, but so without killing him necessarily?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. And as I said before, if there's anyone who has an answer to any of these questions, if you'd like to chime in on it, if you have some kind of interest or experience or expertise, please jump in. But my thought, that's a really tough question, right? And I think primarily the efforts to reintegrate people are the children, right? The soldiers. The estimates place the number of soldiers now anywhere from 200 to 500 with Kony, but most of them are abductees still. But they have repeatedly sort of resisted peace talks without being offered amnesty. So I don't know if the leaders could be fully reintegrated into society, but it seems like the suggestion has been, well, we can offer them amnesty at the very least, and maybe if we offer them amnesty and actually respect it, and for example, in following peace talks in 2006, they had come to some agreement, and it was thought, we're going to have, and they were sort of offered amnesty, and they said, well, but you need to relocate to this place, to this reserve in Congo, and so they did. But then Operation Lightning Thunder, they tried to go in, they sort of set them up, right? They tried to go say, okay, go settle in this area, you have amnesty, and then they tried to go in and bomb them. And that just enraged Kony. And so he's really distrustful of any sort of effort to offer amnesty or any kind of reconciliation. And so, but in terms of actually reintegrating them, the main leaders, I don't know. I don't know if that's possible. I think some people see that and see those kind of negotiations as being the more productive route, because at the very least, it would be kind of a difficult thing to imagine reintegrating him into society, but if that means you get all 490 child soldiers back, then maybe that's worth it. So, if there are other responses to that, then
I'm going to say something really
okay. Yeah, please. Yeah.
I think it is a very difficult question, and how do you do that? And there's a comment on this handout that we can look to South Africa maybe as an example of how to do that at the end of apartheid. They had all these hearings, and people, if they came forward and they said they gave the full truth of the gross human rights violations that they committed for political reasons, then they gained amnesty. And that whole Truth and Reconciliation Commission was a huge part of South Africa dealing with this past. But not everybody got off. There were people who were in jail, and not everyone. In fact, the majority of the applicants didn't get amnesty. But that's been put forward as maybe an idea of some way to deal with that. But the other dimension of this is the International Criminal Court, which has a warrant for Kony's arrest. He's at the top of their list. So even if the Ugandans say, we're going to offer you amnesty, then what does he do about this? He's fully aware of these international agencies. So that's another question that's part of it too.
Well, in 2008, the peace talks actually kind of broke down. Well, Museveni got in trouble because he went to the ICC and said, come help us out. But then in 2008, the Acholi leaders were saying, no, we don't want the ICC here, and so Museveni said, oh, never mind, we don't want your help. And the International Criminal Court kind of got upset and said, no, you can't just back out of it, we need to pursue this. So it's kind of a tangled mess of a situation,
my comment was related to that. I read a journal article on BYU this website that talked about how the Acholi people were trying to get the ICC to drop the warrants out for Kony's arrest, and that Kony had agreed to come negotiate for these peace treaties if he would not have those warrants out for his arrest anymore. I think going along with that, it would be very doable to negotiate some type of peace treaty if those warrant charges were dropped, or if the ICC were to hold Museveni accountable for the different...
For his war crimes.
For his war crimes as well.
Yeah.
My question going along with that is, the research that I've done, it seems like Museveni used to be a lot more inhumane than he currently is. I'm just wondering what the public's general opinion is of Museveni, and if there's like what the political process is like, if he can be reelected, or like, I know a lot of the election processes seem to be like rigged, a lot of people say. So I'm just wondering if the public opinion towards Museveni is like, could also contribute to Kony's disdain for Uganda, and how that would relate to peace in Uganda.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question, and I don't feel totally qualified to answer that because I haven't been there for a while. I mean, in terms of the election, though, I mean, there has been sort of widespread criticism of the fact that he's been in power for 26 years and seemingly, continues to be reelected, and that those elections haven't been fully democratic. They haven't, and again, that's one of the kind of concerns people have about building up his military. Do we need to give him more power? But in terms of general, I mean, I think there are kind of concerns in the public about that. I mean, Museveni was looked on pretty favorably as a good leader by a lot of people when I was there. I mean, some people had their criticisms, but others, thought he was doing a good job. AIDS rates were going down. The economy was sort of improving. But then he stayed in office and won't kind of give power up, and so people are, a lot of people were worried that he's just going to kind of become another story like Mugabe or somebody else who just refuses to let go of power. So if anybody else has sort of a better sense of, if anybody been to Uganda recently, or I know there's a group that goes with Dan Nielsen to Uganda every year. But I guess that's my reading of it, but there may be more to it than that. Yeah.
So I was actually in Uganda last summer doing experiments in the field, and one of the survey questions that we asked people was about their support for the NRM, which is his political party, the National Resistance Movement. And a lot of people were really hesitant or even terrified to answer the question because they thought that we as outsiders, if we found out that they weren't in support of Museveni, then we would tell the government and they would be punished by that. So I mean, there's definitely a fear of him and a fear of what he's done in the past. So.
Well, that's interesting that they would connect that to you being an outsider, because there's been international support for Museveni. The U.S. has supported him, and maybe they perceive that there's skepticism or fear toward that international support for Museveni as well. That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Is there another question or comment?
So you talked a lot about how the Kony 2012 video is treating symptoms more than it is problems, or like the root. I guess, to me, it seems like there's not currently a great solution to the problem. And so, like in medicine, when you don't have a solution to the problem, you don't know how to fix it, you treat the symptoms.
Yeah.
I guess just what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it depends on if treating that symptom is actually going to treat the symptom or if it's going to exacerbate the problem. And that's what the criticism is of sort of increased militarization, is that the problem is that there's been so much conflict, so much, these weapons kind of being poured into the region, that to just perpetuate that by sending in more military, more forces, more weapons, is just making that kind of core problem worse. And you're right, and a lot of things that I've read, people are kind of floating different solutions, but as Dina Mengistu said, it's a complex problem, and there really aren't easy answers, right? And aren't easy solutions, and it's, and I don't know if it's the kind of thing like a disease or a mysterious disease where maybe you'll find the solution, right? Suddenly we've discovered the solution. It's something that's just going to take time and complex negotiation processes and kind of scaling down military. But I mean, that would be my basic response, that if treating the symptom is actually making the problem worse, then it's not worth it, right? I had another comment along those lines. I forgot. Anyway, I don't know if that answers your question sufficiently, but that's...
Is there substantial evidence
That there's not, we don't know what the root cause is? Is that what you're, or?
treating the symptom is making it worse?
Well, yeah, do you want to...
Well, I was just going to say this example of these operations to go in and get Kony out, kill him or whatever. When they have failed, it's made things worse as he's retaliated against civilians. And if you look at this, I'm going to just draw your attention to the map over here. This is the whole region that we're looking at. So it's a regional thing as well. And so he hasn't been in Uganda for a while, but and there are a lot of other politics of what happened in Rwanda and what's happened in the DR Congo and Central African Republic and South Sudan. All of those things contribute to this unstable area where you have these leaders roaming around the region, either trying to get control of resources. So that's a huge thing in the DR Congo. And I can't remember the name of the mineral that's in your cell phones.
Coltan?
Yeah, is it coltan?
Is it coltan?
Coltan.
Yeah.
That is mined in this region. So that's an issue, trying to get people in the region to act in good faith in their trade and mining, and then who is in control of those regions. So it has a lot to do with regional politics as well, and who's in control, who's roaming around with their military. And then the other side is that the military, who has been in the DR Congo and has, just like Museveni's military, has committed a lot of atrocities for civilians too. So this exacerbates things for civilians, and they've been the biggest victims of that. So sending more military in there just to get after these guys, it may make things worse in that sense, and there has been evidence that.
I want to add really quickly, I'd meant to make this point before. There's been evidence as well, and this is kind of complicated, I don't know if I can explain this straight, but so weapons and support going to Museveni's army, they support provided weapons to a group in southern Sudan, the SPLF, because they're helping them fight Kony. The SPLF is resisting Bashir in the north, so Bashir is supporting the LRA and giving weapons to the LRA because Museveni's supporting anyway. And it's just this vicious circle, right? So we give weapons to, the UPDF, and then they just sort of make their way around in these regional politics and tensions, and then just make it worse. I mean, they are this sort of ragtag, the LRA is this small sort of ragtag group of soldiers, but where are they getting these weapons? And they're very well supported, and part of it's because of these conflicts and this distrust from government to government.
I have two questions that are kind of unrelated. The first is, do you think that the makers of this film of Invisible Children had any good intentions in making it? Like,
Absolutely not. Just kidding. Yeah.
I mean, obviously.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I think they did. Some people have accused them that their secret motivation here is to militarize, and that the U.S. government is sort of going along with it because it's an excuse to militarize, and I don't know, there may be something to that. But I think, they have done a good job. And Sarah Weschler, the person I quoted a lot from, she's there, she works for this NGO, and she's seen Invisible Children, and they're doing a lot of good things. They've built schools, and she says there's nothing sort of unusual or remarkable about it, but they're doing good solid work there, building schools. They built an early response system, this radio network to kind of inform people if there are LRA attacks, and that's some great stuff. So I think they're good motivations, but the way that it kind of played out in the video and the campaign as a kind of pointed out, is kind of complicated and can have more negative than positive effects. So what's your second question?
Okay, and I mean, is there still a lot of this abducting of children, like currently? Like how often does it happen? I know maybe the LRA doesn't do it that much anymore, are there other groups that are doing this a lot, like still abducting children and forcing them into their arms?
Yeah. The LRA still does a little bit, but they don't in Northern Uganda. It's been in the Central African Republic and DR Congo. Not as often, but it's still happened. But other groups, I mean, Uganda's not the only, it may be sort of the most famous child soldier phenomenon or situation, but this has happened in West Africa and Sierra Leone and other places. I don't know exactly where else it's happening right now, like at the moment. I don't know if it's happening to the degree, but that's, I don't know, but it might be. I mean, I don't know if you know more about that or...
No, not more than that.
Yeah.
I mean, Sudan, Uganda, this region, and then Sierra Leone and Liberia have been the major areas there. Let's take a few more questions all at once, or comments, and then see where that takes us in the next few minutes. So there were a number of hands raised, so I think we're going to kind of work this way. So we'll take about 3 or 4, and then go from there.
So there's a couple of organizations listed here, the UN Children's Fund and the UN High Commission for Refugees Fund. Do you know if these organizations, and this is open for anyone because it's kind of a specific question, do we know if these organizations have received an increase of funding and resources because of this campaign that's run by this other organization? Does anyone know if that's been the case?
I don't know.
Does
Yeah.
anyone? It would be interesting to look at that. Yeah, especially with all this in the news recently.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple things. I guess I understand the criticisms of the film, but I do want to commend them for how effective they are at getting publicity on such a region that has been deemed invisible, and we rarely see what is happening throughout the entire continent of Africa. So I do commend them for their efforts in that way. They also did a movie before this one, and they talked about how they tried to do like a peace negotiation with Kony, and that failed. And so I'm a little skeptical of I guess both solutions of either doing these military tactics and operations, and also these peace negotiations. What is there any other way to do it? And I don't know what the Ugandans feel. You kind of talked about the Choli, you want to provide him amnesty, but I don't know if I were a parent that had a child that was abducted or mutilated or whatnot, I would want him brought to justice. And so for me personally, I wouldn't want to give him amnesty.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I guess, what are your thoughts on those solutions?
There were a few other hands over here.
So you said that the civilians want a hope of a political process.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any organizations that are trying to form a new political process, or are they just too scared of what's his name?
Museveni.
Museveni.
Uh-huh. Museveni.
I don't know.
There are other political groups that do run in the elections, and but often leaders of I can't remember specific examples from Uganda in the most recent elections, but often opposition leaders are imprisoned or shut down. So I think people are afraid, but there are people who are trying very hard, who are really courageous and are doing a lot. We actually met this wonderful gentleman who heads up this human rights organization in Zimbabwe who, I'm sorry, I wasn't supposed to answer these until, who is filing lawsuits against Mugabe and against the government, which is a dangerous thing to do.
And
but
is Mugabe
this is in Zimbabwe.
Is he the bad?
That's in Zimbabwe. No, that's Mugabe's the president of Zimbabwe. But I'm just saying there are people out there who are trying to form political action groups to kind of promote democracy and
Okay.
But it's a challenge.
And sorry, so what would be, I guess back to your question, what would be the reasons to integrate Kony? Because I don't know, what is capital punishment? Is that okay in Africa or
Yeah.
Were there other hands before we go? Okay, one more, and then we'll.
Well, not to steer away from the actual heart of the issue, but I just want to address the phenomenon of the movie itself. When I first saw it, my initial response was kind of, cynicism, but then I thought, wow, what a great use of social media. I was just kind of wondering what you guys' thoughts are on, why it did catch on fire so quickly, and is it just appealing to this kind of youthful idealism, or why are we having this lecture on it now,
So we had Rachel's question about what is negotiation, is that really a viable option? And then what would be the purpose, or why would you want to reintegrate Kony, right? And then, okay, why now, why these, why all this attention right now?
Yeah. In terms of negotiations a viable option, and the way that Invisible Children has sort of depicted the peace talks, again, that's one of the kind of problems or misrepresentations that's been pointed out, because they say that Kony has continually failed to participate in peace talks, that he always sort of backs out. But it's not just him, right? It's often he's agreed to certain things, and of course he hasn't. I mean, he's been, he's created problems as well. But I think the peace process would have been more successful if Museveni hadn't turned around while they were walking away and tried to shoot him in the back, right? They'd actually kind of agreed to that, and then they said, and he demonstrated really bad faith, and so that's one reason the negotiations have broken down, and so they, and I don't know. I mean, if it's hard for us to see, nevertheless, there are, Ugandans who say, this is our, Mahmoud Mamdani said this is a Ugandan problem that requires a Ugandan solution. And there are a lot of people there who are saying that there's been enough killing. And a military action against an army comprised primarily of child abductees is unconscionable. And so we need to pursue negotiations, as difficult as that is to swallow, right? So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's another solution. Again, it's really complex, but the limited success they've had with negotiations might suggest that that's worth pursuing if they can convince them that Museveni's not going to kind of turn around on them.
Quickly on that, is the majority of the Ugandans, do they not like the film, or are there some that do?
There's some that do.
Well, yeah, I was going to say there's there's some videos. Al Jazeera put one out where they went and they showed this in the film in Uganda. And they have some footage as to Ugandan reactions. It's very interesting. Some people were angry, saying, why are there a bunch of Americans in this film when it's supposed to be about, why is Kony everywhere? We don't want this guy here. What's going on? So there has been that reaction, and one, the woman who, Sarah, what's their last name? Weschler said that she talked to a friend of hers who said people are going to be confused. They're going to be afraid that Kony's coming back, seeing his image everywhere. Not quite sure what the message might not come so clearly in Uganda. But there have been other people who have said, yes, we want him out. We want him gone. So please come in. So there's been some mixed reactions there.
Yeah.
Since I have the mic, I'm going to jump in here too. I recently was looking at the issue of, or what happened in Liberia with the ousting of Charles Taylor and the negotiation process that happened there just a few years ago, and I'm not going to remember the year correctly, but it has been within the past 10 years, and how the women in Liberia, when their society was brought to almost the brink of destruction, there were rebel groups fighting and doing the same thing that Charles Taylor's government army was doing, and they forced these men to come together and negotiate. They went to, I think they were in Accra, Ghana, and they sat at the place. These women from Liberia went and they forced the men to make an agreement because the negotiations were taking too long. So it'd be interesting to look at that case and see what kind of lessons we can take from this one. And there's a documentary about that called Pray the Devil Back to Hell. So if you want to watch that, it's really great. And the woman who was one of the women who earned a Nobel Peace Prize for that wrote her story, her memoirs, and I can't remember her name right now, but okay.
So the second question, what would be reasons to reintegrate Kony? That's a great question, and frankly, I don't think anybody really wants to reintegrate Kony. I don't, but I was trying to find a quotation. Somebody said, "I just want my children back." whatever it takes. I just want these kids back alive. And so there was a willingness among some people to offer Kony amnesty. And it might not be reintegration. It might, okay, you can have amnesty, go somewhere else, right? Go live somewhere else. But let our children come back. And so the reintegration is primarily targeted at, the real objective is to bring the children back, like to bring the child soldiers back. And some of them have been there for years and have grown up there, but they still kind of hope for them to be able to return, to be reintegrated. If that means, giving Kony a chance to be reintegrated, it seemed like some people thought that would be worth it, if that means getting the kids back. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize it's not just Joseph Kony. There's a lot of other people involved, people who are supporting him as his right-hand men, but then also all these other children who are victims of that.
And child soldiers, and also girls who were forced to become wives. There are a lot of girls who were been put in sexual slavery and been wives as well as soldiers. So there's they're kind of being prioritized for those people who are calling for that kind of move. Yeah. And the last question about the phenomenon of the film itself, why did it catch fire? I'm not sure. I mean, I kind of want to ask you guys that. Why do you think it was the huge phenomenon that it was? Why did it spread? I mean, millions. I mean, it's hundreds of millions of people. I mean, people cite different statistics. I think last time I looked on YouTube, it was 85 million people had viewed it, and then it's on Vimeo and other things as well. So, I mean, it's a really well-produced film. I mean, the production values are amazing, and the rhetoric that it's couched in is extremely effective in saying this will change the world. Be part of this, click, share, and you can change the world. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's that or.
And I would say too, at the very end, one thing that caught my eye was that it referenced the youth that rose up in Egypt.
Oh, right.
And Libya, and those who are now still fighting in Syria and other places. And I think then having that happening just within the past year or so, then that, I think it really caught people's attention. But I mean, you guys are the generation that are clicking and watching YouTube.
And that this was really targeted toward. I mean, you were the audience primarily.
Right.
So what do you think?
Well,
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I was just thinking, wasn't Times Person of the Year like the protester?
Yeah.
Kind of going back to what you're saying. So I was kind of wondering, like, is he just riding that wave on? And also, the other thought I had was, I think it was 2 years ago, there was a forum speaker who came and was talking about our generation, the millennials, I think that's what we're called, and saying how we do more service than any generation before us. And I don't know, just because we are becoming so, increasingly globalized, that we're just more aware of what's happening. So we feel this greater responsibility. So I think it's like a combination of a lot of those, and the fact that so many people are on Facebook.
Yeah. I mean, it was a brilliant campaign. I mean, it really was what they tapped into and the resources they made use of. It was really remarkable in that respect. Yeah. So.
Any other comments on that? I think us older scholars in this group learned a lot from this campaign. That wow, we should be using that more.
I should have a Facebook account.
Yeah. Corey just stepped in. I don't know how much time we have left. Maybe we can take one more question. I think who had a question? There was a hand over here. Did you have a question?
No, they got answered.
It got
It did,
answered.
okay.
Okay. One more. Okay, Rachel. Wait. Who hasn't? Did you have a question? Or
It has to do with here, like in Utah, refugees coming here.
okay. Here.
Salt Lake. Are there any refugees coming to Salt Lake from these areas, and is there an impact there that we need to be concerned with?
Yeah, there's actually a Somali community center in Salt Lake City where a lot of African refugees and African communities sort of has centered around. But I think primarily there have been a large number of Somali refugees who have settled in Salt Lake City, and there's an organization, this community center there. They have ESL classes and different kind of things like that. And if you're interested in helping, it would be worth looking into. If you just search that online, this African or Somali Community Center, there could be opportunities to do that. I'm teaching a course in the fall on literature and human rights, and I might make my class go up and do some work with them.
Yeah,
Just
and I
kinda
know
see
that
some
there are
things.
many Sudanese who've been relocated to Salt Lake City as well, and maybe other people know. Do you know of some?
Another organization that said was partnering with, it's called Women of
Uh-huh.
And they work with women refugees. I don't know. They're all from all over.
Women of the world. Okay.
From Africa. Yeah.
Right. And there are a number of them around here. There are.
Women of the world needs any volunteer help they can get. So.
Yeah,
Cool.
you know what, I just want to, this is a great question because that is one way you can directly help. And it's very difficult for refugees to come and jump into this totally new life with nothing. And they may get help for a year or a certain amount of time, and then they're left on their own, and they still need friends and still need a support network. So that's a really great point to bring up. Okay, we're going to get 2 more comments and we'll be done.
I do know with there's a Catholic community and the IRC is here as well. I had a professor that's a little skeptical about some of these organizations. He's from Kenya and helps a lot. So he's skeptical with how we treat the refugees here. So just be aware of that. I guess my question though, with regards to the film is what is your response to what we are supposed to do? Because we're supposed to, I guess, paint the cities with like all of the posters and stuff. So what is your guys' thoughts on, like, isn't that partly illegal too? I'm not sure. So I was kind of confused on that. Like, they just promoted illegal activities. I'm not sure. But so I wanted to know what you guys thought of what we were supposed to do.
I had another question that has to do with if the United States has any other interests. I've heard a lot about drilling oil and stuff, but like if there's any other interests the United States might have to further militarize Uganda, and if that would affect any type of lobbying or efforts that American citizens have in this issue.
That's a good question. It doesn't seem like, I could be wrong, and you should ask other people that question, but it doesn't seem that as far as resources go, there isn't a big drive to have a militarized Uganda.
That has come up a few times though in a few things that I've read, because apparently there were some oil reserves that have been discovered relatively recently, and some people are speculating that may be one reason.
It is definitely an issue in Sudan, neighboring
Yeah.
South Sudan, which is having problems with this issue, and that may affect the region as well as the other mining resources that are in the DR Congo and other areas. Did you have anything else to add to that?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question though, and some people speculated that the reason the U.S. didn't get more involved earlier is because there weren't resources. You know, that this didn't have any sort of impact on U.S.'s interests, economic or foreign policy interests. But I don't know. Some people speculate that that's why they.
Did you want to?
That there was maybe some political motives that Uganda's fighting Al-Shabaab, so it's we're just sending forces over now because they're kind of fighting a fight that we don't want to get involved in. We've already messed up.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
there's kind of that sense of quid pro quo that they're helping us fight Al-Shabaab, which is connected to Al-Qaeda, so let's support them.
Yeah, definitely that's an issue, and that's one of the reasons why AFRICOM was actually
Formed.
formed
Yeah.
because of this greater threat of terrorism on the African continent.
The previous question though about what you're supposed to do on April 20th, I think it is. I mean, I can't tell you what to do. You know, and don't let this kind of dissuade you from supporting it if you feel like this is worth supporting, but just be aware, right? I mean, they're trying to promote awareness, so be aware, do what they asked, and and ask questions and be skeptical. But I can't tell you what to do. I'm not going to, but if it's illegal, it's not worth really getting in trouble for doing it.
I would encourage all of you to be active citizens in your own country, and that means contacting your representatives. And if you and I think in the video it says every time if an issue gets 20 phone calls or something, then it gets on the radar. And I think if you can get it on the radar and also add your voice of whatever you feel the government should do, that's something else that you can do. But that's another thing on the handout on what you can do, how you can spend your money, and that sort of thing.
I was just going to say, I think it's primarily to raise awareness, which I think everyone already knows about it since it's been on the social media and it's been on the news. So maybe resources and time could be used in better ways than just educating people about what they already know.
Yeah.
So.
And littering. Who's going to clean that up? That's what I'm worried about.
Okay, thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much,
And I
yeah.
want to thank Dr. Leman for all of his work. He did most of it. So
Well, thank you for being part of this as well.
All right.
Putting this together. All right.